Hello everyone, and welcome to the vintage side. In this video I'll be going through and showing you how I make this dress. This pattern is from 1951 and I will be making it out of this lightweight cotton. First I'm going to go through and iron all the pattern pieces. I'll give the material a quick iron and then I'll be back. I have ironed all my pattern pieces and I've ironed my material as well. This dress has no collar, no sleeves. It is just a bodice with a skirt. It does include the belt, so you can make your own belt with this, and it actually gives you instructions for sewing the belt buckle. I am now going to start cutting my material. All the pieces for the dress have now been cut. The sewing order, as indicated by our instruction sheet, is to sew the tucks and the center front seam, then to gather the shoulder section, tucks on the back, sew the neck facing onto the back, and then join it around to the front. Finish all the edges of the back and front armholes and neckline. Then we sew together the skirt. The skirt front and the skirt back are each in 3 pieces, so we will sew together each of those pieces and then sew the skirt together on one side. We will leave the other side partly open for either a zip or press stud opening. This dress gives you instructions for the 2 different methods. Then we attach the bodice to the skirt, we hem the skirt, and we make the belt, and then the dress is complete. So I'm going to start with the tucks on the front of the bodice. I'm about to join the shoulder seams, and the pattern has given me some indications so that I can line them up properly. The front of the shoulder seam has an area of gathering and the back is just a straight piece. The pattern has notches which will help me join up the 2 pieces of material. These 2 notches will help me to figure out how much gathering needs to be here, because these 2 notches need to line up with these 2 notches. I have transferred the notches from the pattern pieces onto my material so that I can line them up. The back neck facing has also been attached as it joins up with the front piece, and that creates the facing. The front has the facing as part of the pattern piece. So I'm now going to pin those all together following my notches. This pattern gives 3 suggestions for how to finish the inside of the bodice. The first suggestion is to turn in all of your edges and to hand stitch them in place. The second suggestion is to turn in all of your edges and then to turn the raw edge under and then to hand stitch it in place. And the third option is to turn in your edges and then cover them with bias binding and hand stitch that down. I am going to go with the second suggestion, which is to turn in your edges, turn the raw edge under and then hand stitch all of those in place. I have finished hemming the neck and 1 sleeve on the inside of the bodice. I have left the other one unhemmed because this side has the opening, which is where I will be sewing in the zip. So I needed these seams to not be sewn down because I will be sewing the zip to them. After the zip is put in, I will then hem this sleeve on the inside and then the top of the bodice will be finished. I am now going to pin the skirt to the bodice. I will sew it on the sewing machine first, and then I will overlock the edges together on my serger. As the bodice is slightly smaller than the skirt, I will need to do some gathering. I have sewn 2 loose lines of stitching, which I will pull to gather the material, and so that I get the gathering even around the skirt, I have pinned it together in 4 even points. I have the halfway point of the circle, and then I have the 2 quarter points of the circle, and I will then gather in between those areas, and that will give me a nice even gather. I have ironed the waist seam really well so that it sits nice and flat. I have found this beautiful vintage zip in our collection. This is a lovely metal zip and it's going to fit nicely in my dress. It is the right size. It's the size that's recommended on the pattern. I am going to insert this into the dress and I'm going to make it a lapped zip. So the zip is going to have a folded cover over it. The first thing I need to do is measure where this little silver square sits. So I'm going to line up the zip with the start of my seam. Now, because this seam is closed at the top and the bottom, I want the top of my zip to be as close as I can to where my opening starts. If I was putting this into a skirt, I would want the top of the fabric to be at the top of the piece of material that I was sewing it onto, because then with a skirt, I would put the waistband over that. But with the dress, I'm not going to do that. So I want this zip to be as close to the top as possible, and then I will measure where the end is going to sit. The seam that is going to continue down the rest of the skirt, I'm going to start it from this point. I have sewn this seam from where I pinned it all the way down to the hem. I have also overlocked the raw edges so that they will not fray. Now here's my zip. I have done a large seam, and now that it is folded back, you can see that it is larger than the zip on both sides. That is because I am going to pull this zip all the way over to one side, because the material that it is covering here is what is then going to cover it on the other side. So I'm going to sew my zip off center of this seam. I'm now going to pin the first side in place and I'm going to sew that down, and that'll be a stay stitch for the first side of the zip. Here's the start of my opening, and I am going to place this square at the end of my zip just inside the start of that opening. Now, to pin the second side, I am going to flatten this side of the seam. So I want that to be sitting nice and flat. I am going to measure the distance from the edge of my zip to the edge of the material, and I'm going to continue that same measurement all the way along the zip, and I'm going to pin the second side in place. I'm now going to sew the second side on my machine. I have let my dress hang for several days so that the hem can drop if the material is going to. I have trimmed off any areas of the hem that were hanging a bit uneven, and I am now going to attach my bias binding. I'm using bias binding to hem this skirt because it will give me an invisible hem and it will finish off the raw edge on the inside. This is commercial bias tape and it comes pre-folded, so it is folded over towards the center, and I have just given it a quick iron to open up those 2 folds, because I am going to use one of those lines as my guide when I sew it onto my skirt. So here is my dress all finished. Here is my zip in the side. I completed the hand sewing on the arm. Now, at the top of my zip, I have put 2 hook and eye closures. I have done this because the area here is only a small area that's sewn together. I find it's a weak point, and I have ripped dresses previously in that specific area when putting the dress on. So what I've done is just put those hook and eyes there, and then I've got the sleeve, and it's almost the same height as it is on the other side. So when I'm wearing the dress, that's going to look fine. I found a belt buckle in my stash that matches the dress quite nicely. I have sewn together the belt pieces and it's all finished at the ends. The instruction sheet tells you how to make a belt that does not have a spike. This belt buckle has a spike, which I'm going to need to create spaces for at one end of my belt, which is fine because I prefer my belt buckles to have the spike because then they stay in place. I find the ones that don't have the spike, they just constantly come undone. So the instructions is for a belt buckle without a spike. So I'm going to have to do this slightly differently. First of all, I need to insert the material through the buckle. I am going to create a space for the spike to go through, then thread it through the other side, bring it around, and then I'll sew it together. So I'm just going to straight sew it on my sewing machine. This belt is long enough so that I can turn over this end by at least a good inch. So I've got plenty of material holding the buckle onto the belt. And then at the other end, I have quite a lot of overlap, about 4 inches, and I can punch some holes for my little spike so that when I put the belt on, I can do it up very nicely. So let's get to figuring out the belt. So here's my belt buckle, and I have sewn it on. I did sew it on the sewing machine, but because the buckle was nearly right up against the needle, I did not turn on my machine, and I just hand wheeled the needle up and down to sew the material. Now, if you're doing something that is like this, either you can hand sew it, which would probably have been much safer, or you can hand turn the needle on your machine. It will still have all the right tension, and it will be on there. I'm tugging on that, and that's not moving. That's really secure. So that's my buckle all nicely attached. Now at the other end, I will need to have the spots where I will close the belt. What I've done is I've taken a measurement of where I like the belt comfortably on myself, and then I've gone just 1 inch either side, and this is just, you know, in case I want it a little bit tighter, or some days I want it a little bit looser. Now, if I feel that that doesn't quite look right, then I can go along and add more eyelets. So I'm going to get to sewing these now.